Headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba. This is from the south, and I'm Katrina Goss. Polling station workers have started counting votes after the close of polls in Ecuador's presidential runoff, while opinion polls have the two contenders, economist Andrés Arauz and banker Guillermo Lasso, neck and neck in the battle to lead the country of 17.4 million people. Despite the measures in place due to the COVID-19 health crisis, the National Electoral Council said there were no voter crowding issues before polls closed. The first results are expected at around midnight. Whoever wins will take over from Lenin Moreno on May 24th and will immediately face an economic crisis aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, with a 7.8% contraction in GDP in 2020. Overall debt is almost $64 billion, representing 63% of GDP, of which $45 billion or 45% of GDP is external debt. At the same time, the country has been hard hit by the pandemic, with hospitals overwhelmed and criticism of the mishandling of the health crisis by the Lenin Moreno government. And our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, brings us the latest on the situation in Ecuador following the closure of the polls for the second round of the presidential election.
At the National Electoral Council headquarters in Quito, where recently the polls closed in Ecuador. As you can see here, to this place come all the international observers, the political members, and also all the TV press. Today, more than 13 million eligible Ecuadorian voters will choose the new president of Ecuador. We should remember that these elections are between the progressive candidate Andrés Arauz, between the former banker Guillermo Lasso. These elections are crucial in the Ecuadorian history and in the middle of the health crisis and economic crisis because of the neoliberal decisions took by former President Lenin Moreno. Also, in minutes, all the authorities of the National Electoral Council will give new information about this process, and they should set that the official results will give at 10 p.m.
Thank you, Denise. Ecuadorian presidential candidate Andrés Arauz, who's representing the Union for Hope coalition, spoke of his desire to unite the people of Ecuador this Sunday.
We want to defend the work of Ecuadorians, and for that we need a government of national unity. Today we are here together with all the Ecuadorian people, and we are calling for this unity. We want a government that attends to the majorities and provides solutions to the problems, and that is exactly what we are here for, to provide solutions to the problems of the Ecuadorian people. We are absolutely confident about the work that has been done. We are absolutely motivated by Ecuador's desire to move forward.
Ecuadorian residents of Spain headed to the polls this Sunday to choose between Andrés Arauz, the presidential candidate for the Union for Hope coalition, and the candidate for the Creating Opportunities party, Guillermo Lasso. More than 179,000 Ecuadorians were eligible to vote in Spain, accounting for 43.78% of the vote abroad.
These elections represent an opportunity for change in my country, that we can finally do something new, something different, and that people really realize that we have another opportunity to move forward. Right now, the biggest priority for me would be health because of the pandemic, and then employment, because unfortunately my country is a country that lives from day to day. So we have to make sure that these people can work in a free way with the necessary precautions, but that they can go to work every day.
And to discuss the significance of the presidential elections in Ecuador this Sunday, we now welcome Fidel Narvaez, who's former consul at the Ecuadorian embassy in London and a human rights activist. Fidel, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Fidel, you've been following the voting today, and the vote abroad shows a wide advantage for Andrés Arauz, with over 63% of the vote, compared to Guillermo Lasso, with about 36%. What do these results tell us about the political views of Ecuadorians living abroad?
Well, the vote of the Ecuadorian migrants has always been in support of the citizen revolution, because it was the revolution that restored the dignity, recognized them many rights, as the right to be represented in parliament, or the right to vote abroad, among other rights. And additionally, the Ecuadorian migrants are mostly the result of the financial crisis in 99, 2000, when there was a bank bailout in which Mr. Guillermo Lasso was one of the main people responsible for it. So this financial crisis caused by the banks caused an enormous damage to the Ecuadorian population that had to emigrate abroad to look for better opportunities. Families were destroyed. It was a huge, huge damage to our society. So that explains why the migrants are not keen in voting for a banker or for Mr. Lasso in concrete. And that explains why Andrés Arauz has overwhelming support abroad.
Now, despite the clear lead for Andrés Arauz abroad, it's expected that the overall results could be much closer. How important is it that Arauz secures a significant lead over Lasso?
Well, at this very moment, what is important is to wait until the official counting takes place. It is expected, as the result of the exit polls, that the difference between both candidates is small. So both candidates need to wait until the official count is finished in order to declare victory. Of course, we would like to have a bigger margin of difference between us and Mr. Lasso, but we are confident, very confident, that when the official counting is finished, a good margin will represent an important victory for the Ecuadorian population and for Andrés Arauz as a new president. Yeah.
Fidel, what are the stakes for Ecuadorians in this Sunday's elections? You referred there to the situation of migrants, the economic crisis of the past. What are the two different models that these two presidential candidates represent?
Well, the stakes couldn't be higher, and the two models couldn't be more different. Basically, we are talking about the neoliberal model represented by Mr. Guillermo Lasso, implemented by Mr. Moreno in the last 4 years. They both have colluded in government, implementing the more aggressive neoliberal agenda, which implies cuts to the social investment and basically maintaining the privileges of the elites, and the model of the citizen revolution, which is the progressive model, the model of redistribution of wealth between the majority of the population, the model of social investment, and the model of a country that will have a sovereign foreign policy and will look after the majority and not just after the minority, after the elites. So these are the two models competing, and we are confident that the progressive model has won today. Yes.
Fidel, even though we are, as you say, confident that Andrés Arauz is going to win today, we are expecting that the margin could be small. In this context, is it possible that Guillermo Lasso will try to challenge the results? And if so, what can be done to ensure that a victory for Andrés Arauz is maintained?
Well, the international observers need to be very vigilant of the actions of the National Electoral Council, which is the authority, the only official authority that could decide who here is the winner. We do expect Mr. Lasso to challenge the results. That's not new. He tried to do it also in the previous election, when the same exit poll company that he's using now to claim victory also predicted his victory 4 years ago, when all the other companies predicted something completely different that was demonstrated when the official counting took place. The same thing is going to happen in this occasion, and we need to be vigilant inside Ecuador, and the international community especially needs to be vigilant to this democratic election.
Fidel Narvaez, former consul at the Ecuadorian Embassy in London and human rights activist. As you say, very important to remain alert to the official results as they're released later on today. Thank you for joining us once again and for offering your insight into these crucial presidential elections for Ecuador. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Peruvians cast their votes this Sunday for the 130 members of Congress and the President and Vice President of the nation. Polls opened at 7 a.m. local time, although several thousands of voters had already exercised their right to vote either because they're residents abroad or because of some other exception provided for in the electoral law. A total of 18 candidates are vying for the presidency. Polls showed that up to 7 candidates could be in a technical tie in the midst of major divisions and uncertainty regarding the outcome, with a second round vote in June a near certainty. Likewise, the congressional election is expected to result in a fragmented parliament with at least 10 different political forces securing seats. More than 25 million Peruvians are registered to vote this Sunday, although polls indicate that a large number could opt to leave their ballots blank. And Peru's interim president, Francisco Sagasti, cast his vote in this Sunday's elections, taking place in the midst of a deep political, economic and health crisis. The vote was being held under strict public health measures prompted by the surge in coronavirus cases and in the midst of corruption scandals regarding secret vaccination for top officials. It also comes after months after the country's political chaos reached a new level in November, when the country saw 3 different presidents in a week, after one was impeached by Congress over corruption allegations, and protests then forced his successor to resign, leading Sagasti to assume the post and promise general elections. Peruvians have 18 options for president to pick from in this first round, and up to 6 candidates are expected to have a chance of making it to a second round in what promises to be the closest election in Peru's history, with no single candidate polling higher than 15% at this stage. And Peru's interim president, Francisco Sagasti, called on poll workers to head to their respective polling stations after reports that some had failed to show up, slowing down the voting process.
Unfortunately, 4 of the 5 voting stations could not be installed, right? Because the poll workers did not come. Therefore, I would like to call on all the citizens who have been elected to be members of the polling stations to come fulfill their duty on the one hand, but also to exercise their right to vote.
We're trying to convince those who are in line, knowing that they are vulnerable. Convince them to call their family members who are young people who are suitable to occupy the position of poll workers so that they can help us, so that vulnerable people can vote.
And Peruvians voting this Sunday in a low-income neighbourhood of the capital Lima stress the lack of government support in the midst of the health crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic.
This pandemic, we are getting poorer every day. We do not have jobs. Many of us are not working. For example, I have not worked for more than a year now, and I have not even received a government voucher to help me get through this. The situation is critical. I have not seen much support from the authorities, least of all from the municipality. There are many people dying in their homes, and unfortunately, health centers here in San Juan de Miraflores are collapsing. I am seeing people in the line who are not keeping social distancing. They should keep the distance and wear adequate protection. That's the most important thing for all Peruvians to do, because I have also suffered from this virus, and thanks God, I have recovered.
And at the worst moment of the COVID-19 pandemic, Peruvians were voting this Sunday for a new president in what are the most fragmented elections in their recent history and without any favourites. In this context, Veronica Mendoza, candidate for the Together for Peru coalition, offered statements on the importance of voting.
First of all, I am aware that this is a different, complicated day because it takes place during the pandemic. Yet, every effort has been made from the electoral system bodies to facilitate the vote, extending the voting time, the number of voting stations. We see that there have been difficulties, errors, which will surely have to be corrected in the future. But today, my invocation is that we all collaborate patiently and put democracy ahead. That is what's important.
And also in Peru, residents reported having to wait for hours to cast their ballots, and at least one person in charge of a voting centre said he didn't have the proper assistance to open the voting process. The election comes amid a surge in COVID-19 cases and meagre progress in the vaccination campaign.
We need voting representatives, volunteers, who can be with us. We have elderly people who are waiting. I am the president, and I am alone at my table. I've had to put this handmade sign saying avoid the line to identify the people who are truly interested in entering to volunteer with the voting table.
Meanwhile, Peruvian presidential candidate for the Popular Action Party, Yoni Lescano, who's campaigned on an anti-corruption ticket and according to polls has a lead over the other candidates, claimed he would recover the country from poverty.
The message to Peru was ama Kela, ama Sua, ama Lula, which means don't be a thief, don't be a liar, don't be idle. Without this, nothing can be done, and I hope the people of Peru understood the message. And I have decided today to vote for a government that can recover the country of abandonment, poverty, indifference, corruption, mafia.
And turning to Bolivia now, where elections were held in 4 departments this Sunday as voters returned to the polls to choose their respective governors in a second-round election. La Paz, Chuquisaca, Pando and Tarija are the departments where the governing movement towards socialism is seeking to consolidate its position as a leading political force in the country. In the first round, none of the candidates from these regions reached over 50% of the vote, or 40% and a 10% pointage lead over their second-place candidate, which was the requirement in order to win. After the first round of the regional elections, the party led by former President Evo Morales won 3 of the 9 governorships, and 240 of its candidates for mayor secured victory out of the 336 municipalities in the country. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. This Sunday marks 2 years since journalist Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, was imprisoned in a high-security prison in the United Kingdom after he was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy by British security forces. Our correspondent Pablo Navarrete brings us more details in the following report.
Sunday, 11th of April, marked 2 years since the founder of WikiLeaks, the journalist Julian Assange, was first put into Belmarsh High Security Prison by the British government. He was dragged out 2 years ago today by the British security services and put into Belmarsh. Subsequently, the US government put an extradition request to the British government in order to have Julian Assange taken to the US, where he would face 175 years in prison. He had been in the Ecuadorian embassy, as we know, since June 2012, when Rafael Correa, then Ecuadorian president, had given him political asylum. Since he has been in Belmarsh. In early January, a British judge deemed that he could not be extradited to the US to face charges that included the Espionage Act. Since then, he has been denied bail. He has not seen his fiancée and 2 children for over a year in prison conditions that have been widely criticised. Now, freedom of expression, NGOs and a range of human rights groups have denounced the fact that Assange is still in the UK prison. And today his supporters in London hired a double-decker traditional red bus and went from the Ecuadorian embassy in London to the Westminster Magistrates and finally ended up in Belmarsh. This is part of a day of actions in support of Julian Assange across the world, in London, in Washington DC, in Sydney, Australia. So today marks 2 years since Julian Assange was put into a high security jail by the British government.
Thank you, Pablo. The chief epidemiologist from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Wu Songyu, noted that despite its success in controlling COVID-19, China remains exposed to risk as the pandemic remains severe globally.
The COVID-19 is still at the high-level pandemic stage, with the daily reported cases as high as 300,000 to 500,000. The pressure of imported cases had not alleviated on us, while the risks of local outbreak caused by imported cases still exist. Although China has withstood the grim test of severe winter and the populous mobility during the Spring Festival, there must be no lapse in the routinized prevention and control measures.
Ecuadorians took to the polls this Sunday to elect their new president, and we offer you a brief profile of the two candidates vying for office.
Favored to win these elections is Andrés Arauz, the candidate for the Union for Hope coalition. He is a 36-year-old economist who served as financial policy advisor at the Ministry of Economic Policy Coordination between 2007 and 2009. In 2009, he started working at the Central Bank of Ecuador and became its Director General in 2011, serving until 2013. He was appointed Deputy Secretary of the National Plan of Good Living at the National Secretariat of Planning and Development in 2013, a post he held until 2015. In March 2015, he was named Coordinating Minister of Knowledge and Human Talent in the Rafael Correa government. In April 2017, he was appointed Minister of Culture. Arauz is a left-wing progressive candidate linked to the forces that supported former President Rafael Correa and the Citizens' Revolution, which saw major economic growth and social progress for Ecuadorians, with many returning to the country from abroad due to the improved living conditions. He has pledged to recover the economy and reverse the neoliberal measures of the Lenin Moreno government, including renegotiating the country's huge debt with the IMF. In the first round of the elections, he secured 32.72% of the vote. Running against Andrés Arauz is Guillermo Lasso for the Creating Opportunities Party. Lasso is a banker and the largest shareholder in Banco de Guayaquil and its executive president. This is the fourth time he is standing for president under the government of Jamil Mujad when the country was dollarized. That is, the US dollar became its currency. He was governor of Guayas and appointed senior minister of economy, overseeing the country's worst ever economic crisis until then, including a major banking scandal, responsibility for which he was never charged. Under the Lucio Gutierrez administration, he was roving ambassador of Ecuador, playing a key role in the close relationship with Washington and the IMF. He is a conservative, committed to neoliberalism and the free market economy. He is also a member of the far-right Catholic movement Opus Dei. Although he stood against current President Lenin Moreno in the last elections, he has since become one of his allies and represents the continuation of much of the same policies. He has a 20-year history of pushing backward social and economic policies. He has also been accused of tax evasion and other irregularities at different times. In the first round of the elections, he secured 19.74% of the vote.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.